I know some are probably wondering with the title, Who is Barabas? As I found out researching this, it is not a subject which is talked about much. Even in Adventism and many things, even past sermons, there is very little about him or even about the situation he was involved in the Bible. Bible being the oldest and greatest of history books as well, even had very little being the situation. Me, if those that know me, know I like history and like to dig things deeper. So some of the things I'll be presenting come from quite some time ago. I'm going to start out with reading again the passage for today. And it is found in John 3:17 and 18. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. At the moment when Christ and Barabas were there, and the whole choosing of Barabas over Christ, that was a good example of that right there. Those who chose Christ and those who didn't. But with the stories in the Bible of when Jesus was before Pilate and he was giving everyone an option to free Christ and everyone was choosing Barabbas, as I started to find out in my research, it's a two-pronged message. So I'm going to start out with the first that directly relates to those time and events and read from some of the scripture verses from those times. First one is Jesus is handed over to Pilate, and that is in Luke 23. Then the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Then Pilate asked him, saying, Are you the king of the Jews? He answered him and said, It is as you say. And right there, Christ is even saying right to Pilate that yes, he is the king. So Pilate said to the chief priest and the crowd, I find no fault in this man. With history, something that not everybody realizes, being Pilate and with Roman officials, mercy and understanding was not a strong suit of theirs. And actually in Roman culture, that would be seen as a weakness to have any kind of mercy, being in his position. So after doing this research and me reading this, it kind of hit me that at that moment, Christ saying that he is the king and Pilate saying, I see nothing wrong with that, would not be normal for Roman culture. That would have been normally at any other time anyone else would have did it. He wouldn't have seen a problem. It would have been crucify him for trying to claim he is of any kind of authority equal to Rome or even appointed Roman official. But yet Pilate as well as Herod both even said, I see nothing wrong. Again, then, after he sees Herod, Pilate once again, and then again in Luke 23, now in verse 13. Then Pilate, when he had called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, said to them, "You have brought this man to me as one who misleads the people. And indeed, having examined him in your presence, I have found no fault in this man concerning those things of which you accuse him. No, neither did Herod, for I sent you back to him, and indeed nothing deserving of death has been done by him. I will therefore chastise him and release him." Once again, showing even all the evidence that the Pharisees and Sadducees brought, even Pilate, a man that does not know mercy, appointed by the Caesar, showed mercy on him and could see no fault in Christ. He could even look at him and see the truth. A man that was a pagan, that if he strayed from the religion of the Roman paganism, would have been facing even the threat of the same thing that Christ faced, death, looked before the crowd and said, he's innocent. So it just gives you a little bit to think about with the context of history, because sometimes there is more to a story than just meets the eye if you don't know the context of the history at that time. There's many other parts, I know, in the 4 first books of how Christ took the place of Barabas. And Pilate put him before the crowd, the multitude, and gave them an option, as was custom. Now Pilate had tried, as we know in the Bible, many times, saying, I find no fault, there's no reason for him to be here. I'll give him basically a slap on the wrist, as would it be at that time, and let him go about as what he's doing. I see no wrong in what he's doing. But of course, the Pharisees and the Sadducees seen Christ as a threat to their authority. They seen him as a threat to their nation, that he would change their way of religion or how they're doing things, and then would change their order or their authority on having their power of their nation, and were in fear of what Rome would do. So to find more context, I had to dig quite deep. And I only found a couple of things. There is not a lot out there. One is from Signs of the Times that was printed in Warburton, Victoria, which I believe is Australia, in 1938. And that's one of the newest of the articles. And it has Barabbas or Jesus. I just want to start the context, too, of when Pilate referred to Christ, he called him Jesus, the one you call the Christ. There's a good belief, even back then, Adventists that wrote Signs of the Times, on why. According to an old tradition, Barabas' proper name was, his first name was also Jesus. It was a very common name at that time. Some manuscripts and many ancient versions have the name Jesus before that of Barabas. Thus the Armenian version reads, "Whom will ye that I release unto you, Jesus Barabbas, or Jesus which is called Christ?" His name indeed is rather significant, for Bar means son and Abba means father, so that Barabbas' name signifies literally son of father. Jesus was also Bara Abba, that is son of the Father, or in better context, Bara Elohim, son of God. So in these two men, we have two types of messiahs, one true and the other false. So that's the first part of this. When they were standing up there in front of Pilate, and Pilate was giving them the option, and they still continued to crucify Christ, and he washed his hands of it. Pilate had done everything he possibly could without jeopardizing his own life and really the safety and security of Jerusalem, being, if he just overruled the Sadducees and Pharisees, we know they would have probably rioted and tried to burn down half the city themselves by how unruly they were getting. But when it comes into context and you look at it that way, that really both of their first names were Jesus, brings a little bit more significance into it. You had one that was Barabas, son of a father, and in some historical contexts, they believe possibly he was a son of one of the Jewish leaders. A rebel. Jesus, on the other hand, Son of God, one of peace. So when they were both there, really, in a sense, they were being given the choice between, do you want to choose Jesus the Christ, the true Messiah, the Messiah of peace, or do you want to choose the false Messiah, or as it's referred to in some older texts, the Messiah of the sword? And as you've seen in history, and as it goes on in here, how many times have we seen that even in our days now, that you see these false prophets, false messiahs, that all are more a Messiah of the sword. They want open rebellion. They want to fight. And that's where, in essence, you had the Sadducees and Pharisees egging the people on to choose Barabbas. We know in historical records and in the Bible he was one of rebellion. The reason why he was imprisoned is because he was a thief, a murderer, and a murderer of Romans and his own people. He was known for many times starting open rebellion. The Romans even have that he was one in Jesus' time that would start the many rebellions in small towns at that time. He was one of by the sword. So really you could say at that time what they were choosing was the Jewish nation at that time had a choice before them. Do you want to choose God or Satan? Because really choosing a false prophet, a false Messiah, is equal to choosing to follow Satan himself, and one of open rebellion against God. The vital question, whom will ye that I release unto you, Barabbas the sword Messiah, or Jesus which is called Christ, the peace Messiah? The chief priests and the Pharisees reasoned, if we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, become pacifists, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. So they persuaded the multitude that they should ask Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And that comes in some of the context of Matthew 27:20. This was even the view, back then when the very few times anybody wrote about it. The Jewish nation had an option back then to choose God or Satan. And that's where the second part comes into, as like I said, a two-pronged message, is how does it relate to today and prophecy? We've over the ages seen many false prophets and everything, and people claiming to be either communing with God and speaking or being the Messiah himself coming, seeing all shades of evil. But all in the end, who do they all stand against? The true Messiah, Christ. Some of them, and in my Bible, it has the theological issues, some of the signs of coming of Christ. And one of them is society. Evil increases. Immorality and lack of values increase. Family crises, labor conflicts, and materialism will increase. So in a sense, another thing you could also do, and where it comes in when they are choosing between Christ and Barabas, it kind of adds almost a third part to this. When Jesus was doing that, do you really think he wanted to be released? Just a little something to think about. He didn't try anything to plead his case. So in a sense, you could almost take Barabbas' name out of there and put your own as well. Another little way to look at it. The crowd, chose Barabbas, but really you could look at the sense of Christ was not trying to save himself in any sense. Instead, saying, choose me to be crucified in his stead. Because in the scripturing, he did not come to condemn the world, he came to save it. And through his crucifixion, he accomplished that. It just, now, when it comes down to that choice, we have to choose him and not Barabbas. Now in the signs and how it relates to kind of the end of times comes in Matthew 24, and I'm going to start in verse 5. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nations will rise against nations, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. Then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. Also in 29, the coming of the Son of Man. Immediately after tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. Well, as we know in Revelations 2, there's a reason why some will sorrow and grieve. And as he even warned his own disciples in the coming days at the end, you can take the story of him and Barabbas standing before Pilate and put that in our times right now. As even some have brought up in prayers earlier, things are being distorted. And we see the world again being as it was in the times of Christ. They were looking for not a Messiah to come and save them from their sins, but one that comes with war or vengeance and would destroy their enemies. And why was this? You can almost take from our Bible lesson, we're doing our Sabbath school lesson from today, patience. They lacked patience. Many times, how many prophets that the Jews did not kill told them, they warned them. They even warned them that when Christ had come, that he would not find love amongst his own people. They had the Old Testament. They had the scriptures, same as we do, yet did not see it. So when Jesus was standing before them, and all that had been told to them, it makes you wonder, did the Pharisees and Sadducees actually truly know? I think yes, because of their comments. They were worried about if he continues, though, we'll lose our power. So in a sense, if Pilate, a man that knew no mercy, had mercy upon Christ, and wanted no part, did not want his blood on his hands, and even seen him as a just man, how could they not, knowing that he was coming? But instead, they chose their own power, their own greed. In essence, they had God standing before them and Satan. And who did they choose? They did not choose Christ. So in the end times, that is something we have to remember. And so I just have, for closing up, one last thing to read. And this is from the Atlantic Union Gleaner, August 12th, 1903. The only other article I could really find from our archives that they ever wrote anything about Christ and Barabas. And this is, now remember, this is in 1903, over 100 years ago, and this is their opinion of the world back then. The world is not improving. Evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. By rejecting the Son of God, the personification of the only true God who possessed goodness, mercy, and untiring love, whose heart was ever touched with human woe, and choosing a murderer in his stead, the Jews show that human nature can and will do when the restraining power of the Spirit of God is removed, and men are under the control of the apostate. Those who chose Satan as a ruler will reveal the spirit of their chosen master. And then it goes on another part. When Christ was upon this earth, the world preferred Barabas, and today the world and the churches are making the same choice. The scenes of the betrayal, the rejection, and the crucifixion of Christ have been reenacted and will again be reenacted on an immense scale. People will be filled with the attributes of the enemy, and with them his delusions will have great power. Just to that degree that light is refused, will there be misconception and misunderstanding. Those who reject Christ and choose Barabbas work under a ruinous deception. Misrepresentation and false witness will grow to open rebellion. The eye being evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. Those who give their affection to any leader but Christ will find themselves under the control, body, soul, and spirit of an infatuation that is so enticing or entrancing that under its power souls turn away from hearing the truth to believe a lie. They are ensnared and taken, and by their every action they cry, "Released unto us Barabbas, but crucify Christ." And it goes on. And there's much more. And if anybody wants copies, I can get them for them. So really back then they had a choice. And now same as we have in the prophecies, we know in the days that are coming, it's described in the days of Noah, which really you can think is almost a three-part. Days of Noah, they chose evil. Days of Christ, they chose Satan as their master. And now as we see in these days, people are once again making the same mistake. They're forgetting history instead of learning from the mistakes of the past. And so that's where this message really came as I dug deeper into it, seeing that even in 1903, they seen people, the churches, and everything making the same mistakes that have been made many times over. And so it touched me that you can look at this so many different ways. One, that Christ took our place, that we were Barabbas, and he was taking the cross, which Barabbas should have been given, as we should have been given. but he was taking our place. But also as a prophecy, literal, physical showing of what's going to happen in days to come. That people will choose the evil master over the true Messiah. And it's something I believe we really need to stay on guard for and remember in our hearts.